Hello, my name is Ashley Nyhan, and my research this year evaluated the effectiveness of various de-icing and anti-icing materials on northern New Jersey county roads. Today we are going to start off introducing my research. The New Jersey Department of Transportation, otherwise known as NJDOT, has calculated that from 2008 to 2018, there have been over 77,305 reported car crashes on in-state county roads per year. 1.5 of these accidents were in icy conditions and 2.53% in snowy conditions. Although this may seem like a minimal amount compared to the total number of car accidents, in reality this means that there was an average of 3,101 car accidents per year that occurred on roads most likely not properly fit or safe to drive on. After looking at these statistics, I decided to research the current winter storm routine in New Jersey. First and foremost, I discovered that the state of New Jersey routinely uses both anti-icers and de-icers on roads in order to prevent the formation of ice and keep drivers safe. Furthermore, I found that the NJDOT strategically selects which roads are salt-brined prior to the start of any winter precipitation, meaning that not all driven roads are covered. Finally, I found that although rock salt alone is beneficial in the melting of ice, in many situations, smaller roads and streets are not paid much attention to until the winter storm is underway, meaning that it may be 2 to 3 hours before a truck is seen in a section of road, leaving driving conditions unsafe for drivers traveling during that time. Using this information, I decided to take a deeper dive into the materials the NJDOT is said to use, starting with sodium chloride rock salt, which is one of the most highly used de-icing substances across the United States due to its low cost and vast ability. A study conducted by Dan Hang Chang and some colleagues highlighted the fact that there is a lack of specific guidelines concerning the application of salt on roads, which can lead to the many negative implications associated with the chemical, especially environmentally. Some specific implications include the analysis that chlorine, when used in high quantities, has a direct negative effect on the Earth's ozone layer, and that an extensive prevalence of salt within soil can and will lead to a degradation of physical, chemical, and biological properties of plants, possibly disturbing the photosynthesis and respiration processes that occur within them. Anti-ICERS, in particular salt brine and liquid calcium chloride, are widely used due to the fact that they have a lower freezing point than water, preventing ice and snow from forming on roads and highways, and in many cases decreasing the amount of rock salt that will later be utilized during the winter storm. It has been suggested by the National Transportation Library that, quote, the use of brine in pre-wetting roadways is thought to be environmentally beneficial because it leads to less use of salt, although radioactivity can be a concern for brine obtained from groundwater wells associated with oil and gas drilling. Anti-icers not only decrease the amount of airborne dust caused by solid de-icers, but they additionally stick to the surface of the road and decrease the amount of runoff pre- and post-storm. I have come across many papers that detail the individual traits of different anti-icers and de-icers. But what I discovered through my initial research is that although there is a vast amount of research that has been conducted on specific de-icing and anti-icing materials, there is a lack of documentation that directly compares them. This revelation led me to my research question, which asks, what is the most efficient material or mix of materials that should be used to melt snow and ice on northern New Jersey county roads? This brings me to my approach. Vidar Alsted, in his 2005 doctoral thesis with the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, talked in detail about the importance of choosing controlled variables within research, saying, quote, although not widely acknowledged by control theorists, controlling the right variables is a key element in overcoming uncertainty in operation. With that being said, I chose to make the road surface and ice my controlled variables, the asphalt taken all from the same road, and the ice formed in the same manner. Sigurd Skotstad, a professor of chemical engineering at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, pointed out the importance of choosing manipulated variables as well. For this study, the manipulated variable was time, which gave me the opportunity to see the results over different time periods. After conducting some more research, I discovered the general steps to take when using anti-ICERs, such as aqueous calcium chloride and aqueous sodium chloride, from the Land and Water Resource Department in Wisconsin. They stated that anti-ICERs are usually placed on asphalt within 24 hours or less before a storm. This is done because it is important to have as much material as possible on the asphalt while also giving it time to soak into the ground. Using this information, it was decided that the asphalt would be coated 2 hours prior to the start of my experiment. Furthermore, the Land and Water Resource Department in Wisconsin mentioned that anti-icers work best in conditions close to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and there is a risk of the anti-icers freezing at temperatures lower than 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Therefore, a night was chosen when the temperatures ranged from 17 degrees to 21 degrees Fahrenheit. Next up is my method. The Land and Water Resources Department, located in Wisconsin, provided me with many facts about brines and stated that aqueous sodium chloride brines are typically 23.3% concentration, or a ratio of 2.3 pounds of salt to 1 gallon of water. Similarly, ANTI-ICING, a corporation devoted to publishing accurate scientific information, stated that a typical aqueous calcium chloride solution has a target composition of 33.3% calcium chloride by weight within the water. Using dimensional analysis, as shown in the picture below, I was able to figure out how much of each chemical should be used within 1 cup of water. The next stage of my research was to start the ice formation process. The asphalt samples used were taken from Waterloo Road in Byram Township, New Jersey. At roughly 10 p.m., 2 of 3 asphalt samples were covered in 6 tablespoons of aqueous sodium chloride and aqueous calcium chloride. The ice formation process was taken directly from a paper written by Alex Klein-Paste and Nirmal K. Sinha, which described a way to form ice in the most natural way possible. In order to do so, distilled water was placed into a spray bottle and sprayed onto the pieces of asphalt every 5 minutes. A picture was taken every 5 spraying sessions in order to see how ice formed on each sample over time. In addition to a picture, detailed notes were taken describing what I observed over time. The ice melting process started immediately after the ice formation so as to not contaminate the samples by any outside or non-accounted for conditions. 2 tablespoons of pure rock salt were poured onto and spread evenly across each of the 3 asphalt samples. The samples were then monitored for 30 minutes and a picture was taken every 10 minutes as a form of data. Initially, notes were taken as well that described what I observed over that span of time. At around 8 a.m. that morning, one last picture was taken of each sample to show how the ice melting process looked over a longer amount of time. The data section of my research was solely the collection of the ice formation pictures along with the time and temperature at which each picture was taken. The picture shown is an example of the table that I created along to go with my method. The rest of the notes and pictures taken and used will be found within my analysis. Something that is very important to stress as I introduce my analysis of these experiments is that I did not have a method to measure the exact amount of ice on each sample, so my results are almost purely observational. The 2 main things that I discovered within the ice formation section of my research were 1. The asphalt samples containing the liquid calcium chloride and the liquid sodium chloride anti-icers seemingly had less ice formation over time, and 2. The end result of all 3 samples appeared to have somewhat even levels of ice. This data table shows that there was not a lot of ice formation on the anti-icer samples until about 1:22 a.m., roughly 1 hour and 22 minutes after the distilled water was first sprayed. Interestingly, this image shows the last ice formation picture taken of each sample. It was observed that every sample looked about the same at the end, but taking the image shown on the previous slide into account, it can be suggested that the anti-icers prevented the initial formation of ice. Through further observation, it seemed that the beginnings of ice formation on the aqueous sodium chloride sample occurred faster than the aqueous calcium chloride sample before leveling out towards the end. This means that the samples containing anti-icers would likely still have the tire road friction necessary to drive on without risk more than an hour after the beginning of a snowstorm, aqueous calcium chloride being the most efficient of the 2. Similar to the ice formation experiment, in the experiment that focused on the melting of ice, it was evident that the asphalt samples containing both anti-icers and rock salt tended to melt faster initially than the sample only containing rock salt. For all three samples, the rock salt had an immediate reaction with the ice, and liquid could be seen on the surface of each piece of asphalt directly after the chemical was added. As seen in this image, although the rock salt showed immediate results on all three samples, the asphalt containing the aqueous calcium chloride anti-icer was the first to show liquid from the melted ice running off and onto the ground. This was closely followed by the asphalt coated with aqueous sodium chloride. This shows yet again that the anti-icers made a positive difference on the ice melting efficiency of the asphalt samples, aqueous calcium chloride being the most efficient, very closely followed by aqueous sodium chloride. When observing the pictures taken in the morning around 8 a.m., it was very clear for all three samples that wherever there was a piece of salt on the asphalt, the ice had melted around it. The biggest difference between the samples containing aqueous calcium chloride and aqueous sodium chloride versus the sample with only rock salt was that the remaining ice on the control sample was thicker and more solid in areas that did not have rock salt particles. The other two samples had visibly thinner ice, and there were even cracks showing that the whole sheet of ice had undergone some degree of melting via anti-icers. Furthermore, the aqueous sodium chloride sample displayed a visibly larger quantity of cracks and areas of thin ice than the sample of aqueous calcium chloride. Given the research conducted and my analysis of it, I see that the inclusion of anti-icers on more roads during the winter season and leading up to storms is vital to increasing the safety of people driving on roads, especially at the beginning of a storm. To start off the conclusion of my research, we are going to talk about the limitations of the research I conducted. First and foremost, there is a high probability of human error due to the fact that the anti-icers were handmade and made in a very small amount. There is also a possibility for human error in that there is a possibility that the distilled water was not sprayed evenly on the surface and may have missed the surface completely at times, therefore possibly creating less ice than there should have been. Secondly, this research would lead to an inductive application, meaning that my research was conducted on small pieces of asphalt taken from one county road and may not be applicable to other roads or the northern New Jersey region in general. Another limitation is the fact that anti-icers have the potential to freeze under temperatures of 15 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning it would have to be decided before a storm whether or not to place anti-icers, bringing up how forecasted temperatures may be unreliable at times. Lastly, and as previously mentioned, I did not have a method to measure the exact amount of ice on each sample, making my results and analysis almost purely observational, and therefore not 100% reliable. The increased inclusion of anti-icers on roads introduces a number of future implications. Firstly, it decreases the amount of road salt and sand that needs to be placed on the ground during a storm, therefore lessening the amount of springtime road dust. Springtime road dust occurs when de-icing and traction-increasing materials that have been crushed by car tires over the winter season are kicked up into the atmosphere during the spring season, creating a potentially hazardous environment. All chemicals that are used to melt ice before and during winter storms can be classified to contain corrosive chemicals, and though cars may be saved from dents caused by extensive amounts of salt and sand on roads due to the increase of anti-icer usage, there is still a high possibility that they could experience some amount of corrosion over time due to the chemical composition of anti-icers. Additionally, state and local government would need to take into account the potential cost for new equipment, for the training individuals may need, and the cost of manufacturing and acquiring these new materials. Although the increased use of anti-icers may create more jobs, it may result in higher taxes, which is something that needs to be gravely considered. The most important implication of all is the fact that this solution would help drivers arrive from one place to another safely, even before rock salt has been placed on the road, keeping people safe and potentially saving lives. If someone were to continue to conduct research, I have three main suggestions and gaps within my research that I think would be extremely beneficial. First, I believe that the economic and environmental effects of the increased use of anti-icers should be studied in order to figure out if there is a material that stands out as the most beneficial in every lens. Second, I think there should be research conducted to test out potentially environmental friendly and chemical free alternatives that are usable on a large scale. Finally, in order to figure out what material or mix of materials is best overall, I believe it is important to create a code that can assist in directly comparing the economics, environmental statistics, and efficiency of each anti-ICER and de-ICER. The purpose of this research and the experiments within it was to directly compare multiple de-icing and anti-icing materials to each other in order to determine the material or mix of materials that was most efficient. In order to come up with a definite answer to determine which material is best, there needs to be an economical and environmental analysis as well, in addition to the analysis of efficiency. Although this research is not nearly complete, the final conclusion that I was able to draw from this experiment is that the use of anti-icers, in addition to rock salt, greatly impacts the formation and melting habits of ice and has the ability to make roads safer pre- and post-winter storms if used more often. Thank you so much for listening and happy researching.